Please join me in welcoming to the stage Kelly Carlin.
It's hard, it's hard.
Well, we have more ways to describe dirty words than we actually have dirty words. That seems a little strange to me. It seems to indicate that somebody was awfully interested in these words. They kept referring to them. They called them bad words, dirty, filthy, foul, vile, vulgar, coarse, in poor taste, unseemly, street talk, gutter talk, locker room language, barracks talk, bawdy, naughty, saucy, raunchy, rude, crude, lewd, lascivious, indecent, profane, obscene, blue, off-color, risque, suggestive, cursing, cussing, swearing, and all I could think of was shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits.
Well, you said no filter. My dad, George Carlin, the comedian, was certainly, for a few generations, the ultimate no-filter guy. In 1970, he permanently took off his filter, including his suit and tie, and went from looking like Don Draper to becoming a counterculture god, and eventually an iconoclastic legend who for the next 4 decades always told it like he saw it. With a dad like that, you'd think speaking my truth came easy. Yeah, you'd think that. I may have watched him from the wings backstage speaking truth to power, but at home, where one's real human training occurs, I learned a few other lessons. Speaking one's truth, and speaking in general, speaking one's truth is difficult and at times can feel very dangerous. By the time I was 5 years old, I'd become a very clingy, anxious little girl who got stomach aches and strangely began sleeping on the floor in the hallway. I did this because my parents had begun to fight most nights about my mom's drinking and my dad being on the road too much. My dad knew, and my mom knew, that this was affecting me, and my dad would try to talk to me about it. "How you doing, sweetie? Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine." I was afraid that if I told him how scared I actually was about their fighting, my world would become unhinged. Daddy would leave, Mommy would be mad at me, and I would be left alone. By not speaking up, I thought I could keep them together. But if you can't feel your feelings, you can't know your truth. By the time I was 9 years old, our household could have served as the role model for the school of walking on eggshells. Large amounts of cocaine and alcohol had unleashed a flood of chaos into our lives, and I was now routinely refereeing my parents' arguments. One night at 3 a.m., they'd gone insane right outside my door. My dad had hidden his cocaine from my mom, but of course he'd hidden it so well, now even he couldn't find it. He'd hid it in a book in this enormous bookcase filled with hundreds of books. The three of us began to tear apart the shelves book by book. When we finally found it, it was in Ram Dass's Be Here Now. The next day at a friend's house, my friend's mom asked, "How are your parents?" "Oh, they're fine, just fine." You see, I was afraid that if I told her the truth about my parents, she'd see them as bad or even worse, get them into some kind of trouble. By not speaking the truth, I thought I was keeping me and my family safe. It's called denial. But when we pretend that things are different than they actually are, we can never know how we really want them to be. Now, from those two stories, I don't want you to get the idea that my entire childhood was filled with only strife and addiction. It certainly was not. When my mom was sober, and sober-ish, and Dad was home, Our house was one of the sweetest places in the world to be. We were a very tight-knit, loving family. We'd eat dinner in front of the TV, and Dad would do voices of all the animals in Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. And the three of us would always die laughing at Harvey Korman trying not to laugh at Tim Conway on the Carol Burnett Show. You older people will know what I'm talking about. But the best part of those years together were going on the road. We'd been doing it since I was 3 months old. In the summer of 1972, my mom and I got to go on the road with my dad. Our first stop was Kent State. He took me immediately to the memorial for the 4 college kids that had been shot by the National Guard. He explained to me that they had been protesting against the war, standing up for what they believed in, and the government had silenced them by shooting them. I sat there and tried to take in this information as well as a 9-year-old possibly could. But all I could think was, if the government shoot those kids, could they shoot me? Would they shoot my daddy? Our next stop was Summerfest in Milwaukee. It was this enormous outdoor festival. Summerfest is like basically an ocean of beer surrounded by surrounding an island of sausage. You know, what they call good, clean American fun. And hey, when I think good, clean American fun, I always think George Carlin. Of course, my dad was doing a good chunk of his Class Clown album, including those 7 dirty words you can't say on television. This routine could be heard throughout the fairgrounds by mommies and daddies and little kids. The promoter came rushing up to my mom. The cops are here, and they don't like what he's saying, and they're going to arrest him the minute he gets off stage. Now, my mom knew that she had to think fast because she knew that my dad had both weed and coke in his pockets. So she grabbed a glass of water and made her way out onto stage. Dad, confused, took the water, and Mom whispered to him, "Exit stage left." Dad quickly wrapped things up. We all rushed to the dressing room. Mom's stashing the coke. The cops are coming down the hallway when all of a sudden there was this bang. Someone had popped a balloon. Everyone laughed a nervous laugh, except for me. And then the door opened, and they put my daddy in handcuffs, and they hauled him away. And I didn't know if I would ever see him again. Sometimes speaking the truth is dangerous. A few weeks later, though, we went to New York City for Dad's gig at Carnegie Hall. We were all hunkered down in the dressing room. Dad was pacing like he always did, and Mom was in the corner having a private, very deep, intense conversation, and I was in the other corner reading Archie comics and eating some Fritos when we got the knock. 2 minutes, George. The promoter escorted us through the bowels of the building, and when we came up for the basement, you could hear the stomping and the chant, "George, George, George." There were over 1,000 people yelling my dad's name over and over again, and when he took the stage, there was such a roar that every hair on my body stood straight up. I was surrounded by electricity, and there was this aching joy in my chest. And even though I knew it didn't have anything to do with me, I still felt connected to it all. It was very intoxicating. And I knew that all I needed to do was stay right next to my daddy, and that buzz would always be free. I wanted what he had, but I had no idea how to get there, because when you don't have your own truth, you don't have your own power. When I was 12, my mom got sober, and the chaos settled down at our house. But as I stumbled into my teens and then into my 20s, I had little practice at connecting to and expressing my feelings, my truth, my power, and way too much training in pretending that all was fine. And of course, it wasn't. I did way too many drugs to numb whatever I was feeling, pursued all the wrong men in hopes that they'd discover my truth for me, and ended up with a severe anxiety disorder, feeling powerless over everything. The only thing that eventually helped me to change course was that I began to hear and listen to that small voice that lives deep within us all. Of course, in my case, it had gone from a whisper to a scream to finally get my attention. And at age 25, it woke me up and helped me to walk away from piles of cocaine and an insane husband. It told me, get back to school, go to UCLA, get your degree. I discovered that that small voice within me is the keeper of my knowing, my truth, and my power. One night at UCLA, I went to see this great storyteller, Spalding Gray. He's from New England. He made his fame with a film called Swimming to Cambodia. That night, as I sat in the dark and watched him tell his story, everything changed for me. I suddenly knew exactly where I was heading. I thought, oh my God, he looks and feels as crazy as I do, and yet he's up on a stage letting all of us know about it, and we're all better for it. Instead of being endangered for feeling his feelings or telling his truth, he was being celebrated for it. By sharing his inner life, he was revealing the human condition, and I wanted to do that. In 1997, my mother, Brenda, was diagnosed with liver cancer. They gave her 3 to 6 months. She lasted 5 weeks. On Mother's Day, she died. I'd always imagined when my mom died that they'd have to admit me into the UCLA psych ward and drug and straitjacket me. But instead, something else happened. Those first days following her death, a strength poured into my body, and a clarity came over my mind that I can only describe as an awakening. I'd never felt so connected to myself, life, the universe, and what I believe I truly am, that we all are, pure love. On the day of the memorial, when I got up to speak, I spoke about Mother's Day and how it would never quite be the same for me again. And I spoke about love and how it truly is the only thing that survives death. But as I spoke and looked out at the crowd, I could feel the space between everyone, that unique space that is cracked open by death, where there's unflinching honesty and where nobody needs to hide. And I was filled with such an exhilaration because I was so tired of hiding from myself and the world and others. And I didn't know how and when or where, but I knew as I revealed myself that I had profoundly connected with what I was here on earth to do, to stand in front of others and reveal the rawest truth about life. After 2 years of being deeply captured by grief, I began to act on my revelation and took my creative self seriously. I began to write out my life story, my funny, loving, serious, crazy life stories. And I wrote a solo show that I hoped would do the same thing that Spalding Gray had done for people, just inspire people to be themselves and be their authentic humanness. Once I'd written a script and had it edited and vetted by numerous people who I trusted to tell me if I was being an asshole, victim, or idiot, I sent the script to my dad. He was in it, after all. And I didn't hear from him for like 5 weeks. So I finally called him. Hey, Dad, have you read the script? Yeah, Kel, I have, and we need to talk at your therapist's office. Oh, fuck. We sat down, and my dad said, Kelly, you know I love you, but. He was about to say the words that I never wanted to hear him say. But I have to tell you, I feel deeply betrayed by this. You see, he felt betrayed that I could reveal to strangers what I could not reveal to him. How hard it was for me the weeks before my mother's death when he left us both alone because he had to go on the road. Reading my script was the first time he'd ever heard about it. Telling him the truth about my feelings as I was having them had always been impossible for me. And quite frankly, as was our wont in the Carlin family, he never really encouraged me to share them. But then he said to me, but I'm an artist and you're an artist, and I would never ask you to change a single word of it. But I do have to ask, why did I have to read the script to find out how upset you were? I just looked at him and said, I don't know. I guess I felt like I had to be on your stage for you to finally hear me. Touche, kiddo. Touche. We both realized in that moment how uncomfortable we were and how we'd always been with the truth of our lives as we were living it. But also, I think my dad was worried about the audience judging him as much as he judged himself for those dark days during my childhood. Even though he'd spoken publicly about his addiction, there was something about me sharing my experience that made him feel vulnerable and ashamed. And I had no desire to shame or blame him. And the way I had written about those years and have written about them and talked about them, I know I haven't. I was merely sharing what had happened and how it had shaped me. I saw then that even the great truth teller George Carlin had difficulty with his vulnerability. It's a wonder that any of us are willing to stand up and speak out. I canceled my 6-week run of my show. Success without my father's approval was meaningless to me. But I was also afraid that I would lose my father forever if I went ahead. And even though I no longer knew how or where I would fulfill this vision I had had, I still had my why. I wanted to make the world a safe place for everyone to speak their truth about their humanity. Instead of going out into the world and onto a stage, I turned once again to the small voice within me to find my way. It told me it was time for me to go deep, deep within myself, and to learn about how I and all of us are shaped and trained by our upbringings. I pursued a master's degree in psychology, Jungian psychology, at a place called Pacifica Graduate Institute, where the motto is Anima Mundi Calende Gratia, tending the soul of and in the world. At Pacifica, I learned how our families, education, and culture construct the narratives we tell ourselves about who we are and the world we live in, how we become a mass of filters constructed to keep us safe. But most importantly there, I learned that to deconstruct these filters takes self-awareness, courage, and a loving community. Once I graduated, I began to write more about my life and understand who I was and how I could share it with others so that we could all understand ourselves and the world a bit more. I started performing these stories around LA and honed my craft as a writer and a performer, and I gained a following. I found my people. I discovered more and more of myself, my voice, and my dad even saw me perform once and said, "You know what you're doing up there." Encouraged by my progress, I began to work on a memoir. I still wanted to tell my origin story, my survivor story. I told my dad about it, and he said, "Oh, really? Real artists, they start with their autobiographical work, but then they quickly move on. Like I did with Class Clown," his first album. I didn't know what to say to him. I just sat there in stunned silence thinking, how could he not see that I hadn't even had my own Class Clown moment yet? I put the memoir on a shelf. Yes, I once again chose my relationship with my family over my need to express my truth. But this time I did not do it out of blind habit. I did it out of love. I knew my dad was struggling with heart failure, and I didn't want to add any stress to his life. Spending time with him was way more important than me telling my story at that moment. Regrets? I've had a few. Yes, of course, I'd have loved to have learned to speak my truth sooner. And yes, of course, I wish my mom and dad were alive to see me on a stage like this, speaking confidently and sharing my ideas and stories. But what is important is that I'm here now, because I feel that now is an extremely important moment in the history of humanity. I truly believe that we are at a tipping point. Shit is getting strange, people. And all I know is that the world does not need another quiet, compliant, good daughter. The world does not need women silently playing out their roles that society has cut out for us, leaving us on the sidelines, looking pretty, knowing our places, and God forbid, never coming off like a bitch. What is needed now are fresh ideas and new perspectives that can only come by giving ourselves the role as the truth tellers. We as women have unique ways of looking at the world and knowing our truth. We have bodies that make babies, which plug us into life itself. We feel into the world in ways that men do not have a clue about. Our values are based on much more than bottom lines, getting ahead, and winning contests. If you don't already, I encourage you, get to know your mind and your own body. Bring self-awareness to your life. What are you feeling? What are you intuiting? What are you thinking outside of the roles that you have to play all day? When are you comfortable in sharing these aspects of yourself? And how can you increase your comfort zone? I encourage you to find a community of others who are looking to become more self-aware, learn new things. I don't know, maybe it's you get together and you learn to meditate with a bunch of girlfriends, or create a mastermind group, or follow your courage and go on a Buddhist Zen retreat or a vision quest. Or maybe you need to get into therapy or find a life coach. It doesn't matter. Just do something. Because the world does not need women who are afraid to feel their feelings and own their truth. The world does not need women who disown their power and are afraid to know themselves. The world does not need women who ignore the small but powerful voice within them. What the world does need is women who refuse to live in denial, who don't pretend things are different than they really are. The world needs women who know that speaking truth to power is dangerous, but for the sake of every living thing on this planet, is willing to do it anyway. What the world needs is women who have done the work to gain the self-awareness, courage, and communities they need to step into their rightful place as the truth tellers. The world does not need more of the same. The world needs you, and you, and you. It needs your unique take, your feelings, your thoughts, your ideas, your intuitions, but most importantly, it needs your unfiltered truth. Thank you.